Chairman, there are 19 ayes and 16 noes.
The ayes have it. The resolution as amended is ordered reported unfavorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. Without objection, the resolution will be reported as a single amendment in nature of a substitute incorporating all adopted amendments, and staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.Res. 1249, a resolution of inquiry directing the Secretary of the Interior to transmit certain documents to the House of Representatives relating to the impact of illegal immigration on federal or tribal lands for purposes of markup, and move that the committee report the resolution unfavorably to the House. The clerk will report the resolution.
H.Res. 1249 of inquiry
Without
directing.
objection, the resolution is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I will begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. H.Res. 1249, introduced by Representative Blake Moore, directs the Secretary of the Interior to transmit to the House of Representatives certain documents relating to the impact of unauthorized immigration on federal or tribal lands. For example, the resolution asks the Secretary to produce all documents related to the current level of environmental damage to federal protected and tribal lands along the southern border. I oppose this resolution for a number of reasons. First, I find it interesting that my colleagues are now concerned about the environment. But where was their alarm when construction of the border wall by the prior administration was wreaking havoc on the environment and causing serious environmental damage to federal protected and tribal lands along the southern border? Did they ever express concern or demand an environmental impact study? Of course not. Instead, they pushed the administration to waive every environmental regulation it could to build an unnecessary border wall. Environmental consequences be damned. This resolution is also unnecessary. The minorities had no problem obtaining briefings or information when they have asked. When the Secretary of Homeland Security testified before this committee just a few months ago, the issues discussed in this resolution were never raised once. Rather than take up the committee's time, my colleagues can easily request this information from the Department of Interior's Congressional Liaison Office, which is the normal and appropriate route for these types of requests. I urge my colleagues to oppose this resolution, and I urge all members to report it unfavorably. I now recognize Mr. Gomet for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This resolution of inquiry would direct the Secretary of Interior to provide Congress with important information about what's happening at the southern border. As everyone here knows, whether they will admit it or not, illegal immigration has a devastating effect on communities throughout our country, and especially those on the southern border, as many of us have seen firsthand for years. Illegal immigration is wreaking havoc on our economy, and it's a leading cause of illegal drugs, including fentanyl, coming into our country, which is estimated to have killed over 100,000 Americans that some of us care about in this country. Something that is less understood is the effect that aliens illegally crossing our borders are having on the environment. On their journeys into our interior, aliens routinely trample on and otherwise harm the habitats of wildlife and vegetations. They also leave large quantities of trash and other refuse. Reports indicate this has taken a devastating toll on the environment near the border. To answer the chairman's question, some of us have been raising Cain about the issue of the effect on the environment. We've seen what it's been doing in Arizona. We've seen the devastation by no one going into wilderness areas with motorized vehicles except all of the people bringing in illegal aliens, bringing in drugs, bringing in munitions. According to the Center for Immigration Studies, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality estimates that over 2,000 tons of trash are discarded at the Arizona border every year. These we've seen, we brought pictures, we've raised the issue, especially in natural resources. This ROI would help us better understand the nature of this problem. The ROI would direct the Secretary of Interior to produce information related to the current level of environmental damage to federal protected and tribal lands along the southern border. It would also direct the Department of Interior to provide Congress with information about the costs associated with the cleaning up of the refuse left behind. In addition to information about the environment, the ROI would also require the Secretary to provide information related to the illegal drugs and how cartels are taking advantage of the Biden administration's lax approach to border security. We saw that cleaned up during the Trump administration as the wall was being constructed, the environment was being protected, but all that's gone. To that end, it would provide Congress with information in the possession of the Interior Department related to drug smuggling and cartel activity. The Biden administration's failure to secure the border is an issue that affects every one of our communities and is something we should all want to better understand. Mr. Chairman, this is an important resolution that would provide us with much-needed information about these discrete aspects of the toll being taken by illegal immigration on our southern border and the environment. I urge colleagues to support the resolution.
Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I now recognize myself for purposes of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for purposes of amendment. I will recognize myself to explain the amendment. This amendment in the nature of a substitute makes a single technical change to the resolution of inquiry by spelling the number 14 instead of using the actual number. No other changes were made to the resolution of inquiry. I urge all members to support the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time. Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? Who seeks recognition? Nobody seeks recognition. The question occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to be recognized. I'm sorry, I was trying to.
Mr. Biggs seeks recognition. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word and.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you so much. When the chairman said that Republicans obviously do not care about the environment because we didn't express anything when President Trump was trying to build a fence across 2,000 miles of border, he must not have been paying attention to some of the language that I was using and I know many others were using. We do care about the environment. We care about the concerns with the tribes as well. I'm sure the chairman's unaware that across Arizona's border, there's one tribe that has 62 linear miles that border the international, that sits on the international boundary with Mexico. The federal government for decades has respected and provided deference to tribal leaders who don't want a border wall like we have elsewhere in Arizona that President Trump has put up. Instead, long periods of time to negotiate, to get some kind of technical aspects to allow cameras to go in and sensors. There's an additional tribe down in Yuma that has about 10 miles, linear miles right on the border as well. They also don't want a fence, but they allowed Normandy barriers there. The problem in both places, though, is that those are the vast areas that through which literally tens of thousands of illegal aliens cross every year. And in so doing, they also end up crossing natural preserves along our border area. They've cut roads. They've left tens of millions of pounds of garbage and human refuse and litter in those areas. I am astonished when I hear someone say that we have not tried to deal with environmental problems, that we should not worry about a report. The reports regarding environmental garbage and trash coming from Interior and Homeland Security are few and far between. It speaks to people who haven't actually been down to the remote areas of the border to see otherwise pristine areas, beautiful areas of desert, destroyed by the refuse there. I have been speaking extensively about the need for our environmental activists who disagree with me on everything else to come forward and stand up and speak about the environmental damage and wreckage that is happening in the Arizona desert and in some of the mountain areas along that border Mexico. I'm astonished that the chair would oppose this. This is a transparency measure. If there is the data, then let's get it from Interior and DHS and let's get it to the entire American public. They need to understand that not only is it a humanitarian crisis along the border, it is an environmental crisis as well. There is violence that happens on the border. Our border is controlled by cartels. We need to regain control of our borders. We need to also work with environmentalists to make sure that this stops. You should see it. I invite you to come down with me, Mr. Chairman. I can take you to place after place, literally hundreds of places that have untold amounts of refuse, human refuse and debris, destroying our habitat. I invite you to come with me. And then maybe you will also share my concern and my passion for trying to get this information. I support this resolution. It is necessary. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who else seeks recognition? For what purpose does Mr. Benz seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I've joined my colleagues, Mr. Biggs' remarks. And just for purpose of the record, I would like to share some numbers. I think we can assume, without concern of folks thinking otherwise, that the million people that got away in some fashion or another crossed the land I'm about to describe. So the acres of federal land within 100 miles of the Mexican border, the Bureau of Land Management, 12 million acres. The Department of Defense, 5.7 million acres. The United States Forest Service, 3.7 million acres. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, 3.5 million acres. The other 2.2 million acres, and these are all, the Bureau of Reclamation, 21,000 acres. Total federal acres, 30 million within 100 miles of the Mexican-American border. I think it's clear that the people of the United States have reason to be concerned about the impact on these millions of acres, 30 million to be exact, that the unstopped flow of immigrants is causing. Also, I want to go back to some remarks that were made about the wall. I have here, Mr. Chair, 5 pages, single-space list of the different types of creatures, endangered, threatened, candidate species like to be affected by construction of Trump's border wall. This list was created in 2017. I'm guessing things haven't changed much, but we have 5 pages of the types of creatures and plants that would be affected by the construction of Trump's border wall. Could we assume safely that the million people that have come across unapprehended this year may have had some impact on these 5 pages of endangered and threatened candidate species? Could we assume that? And I'd like to offer this for the record, Mr. Chair.
Without objection.
I would normally take the time, but it's late in the day, to read down through some of these creatures, but don't you think the American people should know the type of impact that this so-called secure border, the folks crossing into the United States are having on their property? That's what this resolution asks for. It's pretty simple. What better thing to ask these agencies for than the conditions that are being created by another agency, that is Homeland Security, failing to stop the traipsing of these people across these sensitive and public lands. Mr. Chair, it's sad, isn't it? 5 pages of endangered and threatened candidate species, all of whom were called out in extreme detail when it came to the wall, but are being ignored now. For what reason? Are they being less hurt? Unlikely. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does Mr. Owen seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
I'd like to thank my colleagues and fellow member of the Utah delegation, Blake Moore, for introducing both H.R. 1249 and H.R. 1250. I encourage members to support these resolutions of inquiry. Illegal immigration is harming the public lands along our southern border. Reports show that immigrants who cross the southern border leave trash and other refuse behind on their trek. Although Utah is not a border state, 64% of Utah's federal lands owned by the federal government. We know what it's like to have federal government control our lands, and it comes with problems. In the case of the southern border, we must hold the Biden administration accountable for the decision to leave an open border. These resolutions of inquiry will bring transparency and help us better manage our lands. Thank you, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else seek recognition? In that case, the question occurs on the amendment nature of a substitute. This will be followed immediately by a vote on reporting the resolution. All those in favor respond by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment nature of a substitute is agreed to. Reporting quorum being present, the question is on the motion to report the resolution H-Res 1249 as amended unfavorably to the House. Those in favor respond by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Recorded vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler.
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren. Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Aye.
Ms. Jackson-Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen. Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
Johnson of Georgia votes aye.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Deutsch. Ms. Bass.
Aye.
Ms. Bass votes aye. Mr. Jeffries. Mr. Cicilline.
Aye.
Mr. Cicilline votes aye. Mr. Swalwell. Mr. Liu.
Aye.
Mr. Liu votes aye. Mr. Raskin.
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Jayapal. Ms. Demmings. Mr. Correa.
Aye.
Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Scanlon.
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Ms. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Neguse.
Aye.
Mr. Neguse votes aye. Ms. McBath. Ms. McBath votes aye. Mr. Stanton.
Aye.
Mr. Stanton votes aye. Ms. Dean.
Aye.
Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar. Mr. Jones. Ms. Ross.
Ross votes aye.
Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush.
Bush votes aye.
Ms. Bush votes aye. Mr. Jordan. Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Shabbat. Mr. Shabbat votes no. Mr. Gomert.
No.
Mr. Gomert votes no. Mr. Issa.
No.
Mr. Issa votes no. Mr. Buck.
No.
Mr. Buck votes no. Mr. Gates. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes no. Mr. Biggs.
No.
Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock. Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Stubbe.
No.
Mr. Stubbe votes no. Mr. Tiffany. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey votes no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Bishop.
No.
Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Fishbach.
No.
Ms. Fishbach votes no. Ms. Sparts.
No.
Ms. Sparts votes no. Mr. Fitzgerald.
No.
Mr. Fitzgerald votes no. Mr. Benz. Mr. Benz votes no. Mr. Owens.
No.
Mr. Owens votes no.
How is Swalwell recorded?
Mr. Swalwell, you are not recorded.
Aye.
Mr. Swalwell votes aye.
How is Escobar recorded?
Ms. Escobar, you are not recorded.
Aye.
Ms. Escobar votes aye.
Has every member voted who wishes to vote? Clerk will report.